Good morning. My name's Malcolm Young. I'm the Dean of Grace Cathedral. Welcome to the Forum. It's such a blessing to see you on this beautiful and bright day. Just over a year ago at the Forum, we spoke with Yotam Politzer about the disaster relief aid, IsraAID, and Dr. Iris Adler and photographer Susan Weiss. We talked about their trip to Lesbos, Greece, and about the European Union and the agreement they signed with Turkey to limit immigration in through that corridor. Although the borders are technically closed, the refugees crisis is not over by any stretch of the imagination. On the island of Lesbos, for example, where the population is 85,000, there are 5,000 people in refugee camps. Most of the refugees who traveled the Balkan route through Turkey and Greece to Europe are Syrians and Yazidi from Iraq. This past March marked the 6th anniversary of the outbreak of war in Syria. Since then, 5 million Syrians have fled to other countries as refugees, and more than 6 million Syrians are displaced within their own country. So 60% of Syria's population is homeless. For the Yazidi of Iraq, the main cause for refugees is ISIS, whose treatment of the Yazidis is considered by many to be genocide. As many as 20% of Yazidis are now refugees. Last month, our guest today, the senior rabbi at Congregation Beth Emanu-El, visited with a small group from Bay Area of rabbis and Muslim leaders to meet with Syrian and Yazidi refugees. It was a trip that was organized by IsraAID, and we're wondering what's changed since they were last year. We're so fortunate to revisit this very important topic with one of my favorite clergy in Northern California.
Mutual.
Beth has she has an incredible pastoral presence. You cannot ask for a better pastor and caregiver than Beth. So we're so glad to have Rabbi Beth Singer from Temple Emanu-El here at the Forum this morning.
Thank you. I am thrilled. I'm thrilled to be here for so many reasons. I'm usually at Sunday school at Congregation Emanu-El, but we've taken a break for the summer. We have 650 children who come and learn with us in our religious education program, but everyone needs a break. So I finally get out into the community and come to church on Sunday. So I'm really excited about that. And I'm also thrilled that given the fact that you already had this topic, the refugees, and there's so much going on in the world today, that you would come back to this and not just say, well, we had IsraAID last year, so we're not going to have IsraAID again. Because I think because so much is going on in our country and in our world right now, we have so many things to be concerned about with the environment and with terrorism and with homelessness and poverty and all the things that all of us care about. The opportunity to think about refugees can easily get lost. Yeah. And I do think that that the situation has changed perhaps since Yotam was last here. For example, a lot of agreements were made in the European Union, right. And people who were coming in through Lesbos because they took us to this spot where all the boats had come in. And you just stand and look like the exit sign over there in the green. There's Turkey right there. You see it with your own eyes. Those 2 points are so close from Turkey to this point on the island in Lesbos, Greece. And Greece is, of course, part of the European Union. So it's the natural spot for anybody who wants to try to save their own life and the life of their children. And though we certainly met a lot of Syrians and we spoke with Yazidis, which was the most heartbreaking thing, we can talk more about that. There were Kurds and Iraqis and Afghanis, everybody trying to get there, and most people wanting to get through Greece just to get to someplace else.
Right.
Because many of them now have families in Sweden, in Holland, in Germany, but the agreement made it so that there would no longer be these huge boatloads allowed to come across, so that stopped. And then they said, whatever country you arrive in, that's where you stay for a good long while. So the people that have come to Greece, the numbers that you mentioned, they are trapped there.
Right, exactly. And it's hard to imagine what the future is for them. I
Right.
mean, there's not like a plan to have them integrated into some other European country.
Right, at this moment.
You know, I loved it when you mentioning your Sunday school. Our children have great friends who are part of your Sunday schools and admire it very much. And I try to imagine what you were like as a child yourself. Because there's something that's deep in you that we can just see it just from just your opening remarks. You have a passion for this.
I do, and I will just say that I was that kid where everybody else hated Sunday school, and they would climb out the windows, and I knew the teachers weren't very good. I loved Sunday school. I just thought I loved going there. I loved learning about the history of my people and the heritage and the imperative to do good in the world and to make a difference, which is something I know our religions share.
Yeah, exactly. That I loved this Grace Cathedral when I was a boy.
Yes, we were just
dreamed
talking.
About coming up
I said, could you dream when you came here as a little boy?
Yes, the answer is yes.
You'd be right up here.
Yeah. So, what did you learn as a child? I mean, that inspired this desire to seek help for people who really have no one pulling for them?
Well, I'm going to tell you a really surprising story. And that is that I actually grew up in a household of very politically conservative, and I don't know the politics of anyone in our room. I know our synagogue is a mix of politically conservative and then 95% politically liberal.
Right.
So it's a mix, and I'm well aware of it because I grew up like this, only I grew up being in the minority. My parents were very proud Republicans, and they kind of had become disenchanted with the Democratic Party and of their time, and they just felt everybody should pull themselves up through the bootstraps, and we don't have to give handouts to people. And these were otherwise very loving parents who still, through our synagogue, took us to important social justice programs. But I hit a stage as a teenager where I was paying attention to everything that the Torah and Judaism was teaching, and it was really not reconciling with my parents' politics because the Torah, the Jewish Bible, it just says over and over again, remember that you are strangers. Remember that you are strangers, and you have to treat people thusly and live your entire life with the historical memory of having been strangers in the land of Egypt and having been slaves and having come out of that, not so that we could just start our own parties, but so that we could do something for everybody else who's not yet there. So the religion was very powerful.
A refugee religion, and
it really is.
Yeah, that part is still deep in you.
Yeah,
that's great. That's a great kind of theological picture for us to see. And I wonder too. I mean, it works. It was so powerfully for you. Like, how do you cultivate that sense of compassion for the children that you minister with and teach?
And I'm sure you do this too. We start from day one in our religious school that social justice, learning, and action is just part of the educational program of our synagogue, and the children start immediately learning the Bible stories, learning from the Torah, and learning about our holidays like Passover, the holiday of freedom from slavery, and then coupling that with work in our community. Our synagogue is especially invested right now in local homelessness issues, and the issue of one of our own congregants sort of started noticing, or she heard a statistic about the number of children in the San Francisco Unified Schools who don't have a home, and she was blown away by that any child going to public school here in San Francisco wouldn't have a home. So we're working on issues like that. And then, it's interesting because my first year here, this really nice man came into my office to meet me, and I was talking to him, and he works for this very important organization called HIAS, the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, and that was devoted for decades to helping Jewish refugees. And the organization helped Jewish refugees settle in America for so long, and then there really haven't been a mass of Jewish refugees in a long time, and that organization faced a choice to shut down because they completed their mission, or to take all the know-how they had from helping Jewish refugees to helping refugees worldwide. And I said to this guy, I'm sorry, he just came into my office and I said, what do you do for them? And he said, I'm the head of it. And I said, oh, okay. He was bringing his child to Stanford, and he was sort of in the neighborhood and thought he would drop by and introduce himself. And I said, well, we're just, we're ready to start settling refugees as soon as you have some to send us. And he said, look, nobody can afford to live in San Francisco. We're not bringing any refugees to San Francisco because it would be untenable for them, no matter how much help and support, it just isn't the right place to bring Iraqi and Syrians.
Right.
And so that made me realize how creative and how much deeper we have to dig to do something real when what we're doing is not, I've read so many stories of Canadians who have really hands-on sponsored a family and shown up every single day, and I'm so inspired by those stories, and it's what I want to do, but I can't move to Canada right now. So that's what was the sort of the trip to IsraAID was inspired by, well, there's got to be more that we can do because it's just agonizing.
Did he first connect you with IsraAID, or had you?
He didn't. I really never heard of that organization at all.
Yeah, that's what we felt like last year. I mean, we were amazed when they came.
I know.
Your story was incredible.
And a few years ago when I first arrived in San Francisco, my husband and I were rabbis in Seattle for 18 years, and then we got called to Congregation Emanu-El, and so we came to Emanu-El, and we're really just sort of getting situated here, and that's when the height of all these refugees coming over illegally was happening, and some of our congregants just got on an airplane and went to Lesbos. And I couldn't believe you could do that. They just went. And I know I was in conversation with one of them, and she just started mentioning, she was messaging me, and she started mentioning this group, IsraAID, that was on the ground. And she said, I love IsraAID. They're really productive. They're really here to stay. They're doing remarkable work. And that's when I first heard of it.
Yeah, that's great. And so then, and then how did you meet them?
So another rabbi in town, Rabbi Marv Goodman, who some of you may know, and Rabbi Alan Bennett, decided they wanted to organize a group of rabbis and Muslims to go together to see the work that IsraAID was doing, and they got a grant for us to do that. And I had to think about it because I know that it takes a lot of resources to fly anybody over there, and you go and you look around and you visit the camps and you come home and you go back with the rest of your life. And I didn't want to waste anyone's time or money with resources that could be used to feed families. But I did decide to go. I felt like possibly just listening to people's stories and bringing back those stories would be something I could do. And then, of course, when I went and I saw just how impactful this particular little non-governmental organization is, IsraAID, and their model of bringing Arab Israelis and Jewish Israelis, and that's fundamental to the work they do because not all the Jewish Israelis are perfect Arabic speakers. They speak a little bit, but they recruit Arab Israeli doctors and psychologists and art therapists, and they really try to fill in the gaps that other of the major, we went and visited installations by UNHCR and all these varieties of places where they're housing refugees, and IsraAID just brings in the psychosocial support and the therapy and the doctors. And I met this this therapist, Maisam, and she's an Israeli Arab who grew up in Haifa, and she really does not have very positive feelings about Israel at all. She sees it from a perspective that I understand, but she now lives with it. I said, well, I can't believe you're doing this. I can't believe you're doing something under the banner of IsraAID. And she said, I really wanted to help the Syrians, and this was my way to be able to go with an organization that's really effective. And now she lives with these young Jewish Israelis in Lesbos, and they all are on a 3 or 6 or 11-month stint, and then others will come. So it's really changes the individual when we come in contact with one another who are different from us.
Yeah, and that's what we talked about last time. What I remember most was just how these doctors and aid professionals. I mean, their experience growing up and living in Israel, language abilities, being able to gather together in crises, turned out to be just the sort of skills that you need to have in order to help refugees.
Right.
And it was this way to bring people together who may not have.
And you may remember, I don't know if everyone was here when Yotam was here, they actually go wherever there's a catastrophe. So it's not only refugees, they go to earthquakes and mudslides and Ebola. And Yotam spent like 9 months in Sierra Leone at the height of the Ebola crisis, bringing IsraAID. And I thought, that's way too brave for me. I don't think I could do that, but they do. And the refugee help is just one of the things that they do.
Yeah, exactly. So you went last month to Lesbos. Tell us what the experience was like. I mean, who did you meet? I really appreciate you saying how expensive it is to send you there, and really feeling you need to be committed to this before you'd go.
Right.
You just couldn't take it.
Which is why I also really appreciate this opportunity, to bring some of those stories to you, because I feel like if we could all transport this whole room to Thessaloniki, which was the first city we went to, and then Lesbos, and we could all meet these children and these people that are just moms and dads, and they really have the same aspirations that every single one of us has. They're just human beings, and sometimes I know that our government gets confused and just thinks, oh, if you're from there, you're a terrorist. And these are the people that were the victims of the terrorists and are trying to get away from the terrorists. So it's really rough that they're not, more of them aren't coming here. They should. But in the meantime, they're there. So one story I wanted to share with you is just kind of a funny thing in the life of a busy clergy person. That one thing, as I was leaving to go on the trip, I was helping our community prepare for our annual Holocaust Remembrance Day. And we do that. We bring all the synagogues together at the JCC, and we have a memorial. And all I thought about at the time was, I'm not going to be there for that. I'm going to be on my trip at that time. But I didn't do the other part of the equation, which was that my very first day in Thessaloniki, where we flew to first, where they have a whole variety of encampments for refugees. It happened to be Holocaust Remembrance Day. And we went to I don't know how many of you has anyone ever been to Salonika, Greece? Yeah, it's very beautiful. It's on the Mediterranean. It's a gorgeous, gorgeous place. And there was once this tremendously thriving Jewish community there that I didn't know that much about myself. And we went to the museum first, and during the Holocaust, 50,000 Salonican Jews were deported to Auschwitz, and almost all of them perished in Auschwitz. And in the museum also, there was just one thing that really stood out for me, and this ties into where I'm going with the refugees, but they talked about how well before, when people weren't even fully aware of the concentration camps, that one day the Germans just marched 9,000 Jewish young men out into the public square in Salonika, and they just did a day of humiliation where they made the 9,000 Jewish men just stand there and take their pants off, or be humiliated in a whole variety of ways. And they showed pictures, and you could see that Greek people were kind of watching this out their windows, and there were civilians that were watching all of this, and the day came and went, and they let the men go back home, and then everyone got deported, and nobody said anything at all. So that really hit me very hard. And every day that I read about the Syrian conflict, and I think about the days that I just go about my beautiful life here, it hits me very hard. So then later that day, we went to a really interesting urban refugee center. It was an apartment building that had been built by a Greek investor, and times are tough there. And this British couple bought the apartment building and turned it into a refugee center and brought 70 family Kurds, Iraqis, Syrians. And so it's a small thing, and they all have their own apartment and they have common space. And we went, and first we just sort of walked around, and I found this beautiful girl, Avin, 13 years old, and she was able to speak English, which I could hardly believe how in such a traumatized life and she was Kurdish, but her English was good enough that the two of us could communicate. And she asked me if I wanted to come see her apartment, and we went and sat up there. And she and her family are all artists, and she showed me her drawings, and she had some really beautiful drawings, but she also had some horrifying war drawings that you would never, no 13-year-old here would ever be able to produce art the way this girl produced art. And she just, that's who we met. And to do that on Holocaust Remembrance Day, and to feel that somehow the world, just thinking about all the things we wished that people had done for the Jewish people but didn't, and now we're in the position to do for these people, and it lays a heavy responsibility.
Yeah, it definitely does. What were the refugee camps like, and what were the conditions like for people who lived in them?
I was fascinated by how different they were. How many different types of refugee encampments they were. They ranged from one that makes it in the newspaper a lot in Lesbos. It's very, very large. It's almost all male. It's dangerous. They go on hunger strikes and they fight with each other, and we were not allowed for our own safety to enter that camp, and it sounds like a camp with deplorable conditions, and IsraAID is not able to get in there. But then there was the apartment building, and that was really fascinating, because one of the smart things that the European Union figured out to do was rather than bringing food and supplies all the time to the refugees, they gave the refugees debit cards that would work in the town, because you can imagine that with the Greek economy as it is, the Greek people are not that thrilled to have refugees when they themselves don't have jobs. But to have refugees who are coming to your market and spending money at your market and buying provisions for their family, that was a good thing. And then it causes people to interact and to get to know each other face to face, and for them to know this girl named Avin, who comes shopping for her family. So that was really important. And then there was one we went to that was sort of surreal to me. Well, the one that was very real to me, we went to one that was just about to open in 2 weeks, and it was really just containers. Like you would almost see these shipping containers. And they outfitted these shipping containers so that 400 or 500 families will be able to each move into a container. And they had a little tiny toilet and shower area and a teeny tiny kitchen, and then this little tiny place with 4 bunk beds for the children. And I assume the parents would, and I think it's probably better than what they were coming from, but very hard to see that. And the man who is running that, Tomahir, for the UNHCR, I was very struck by him because he grew up in Serbia, and he grew up in Serbia right at the moment when the war came, and he actually sat and thought to himself, I don't think I can take up arms. I just don't think I can do it. I think if I could get a job with a humanitarian organization, I would be spared having to go to war. And that's what he did. Wow. And that I thought I was so moved by his story. And then the one that really just, I've never seen anything like it. We walked into one in Lesbos. I forget, I have it all in my little notebook here. And it was run by one of these guys who could be he's a Greek guy who could be this motivational speaker. And we walked around it, and it felt like Jewish summer camp. Kids were walking around arm in arm, whistling and singing, and there were kids playing games, and the moms were sort of gathered around together, getting stuff together. And this guy just decided that it's not going to be called a camp, and these are not going to be refugees. This is a community, and these are families, and we're going to set up this dynamic in this place, and everyone's going to contribute, and it's going to be beautiful. And it was a little odd, but it was a very serene, like if you had to be a refugee in a camp, this was where, and they set up an olive oil making industry to teach the refugees how to produce olive oil. So that was a really exciting thing that was going on there. And there was one other one where it was a hotel right on the sea. It was so beautiful, and a group had taken over that hotel and made it into a very, very small refugee shelter area, and it had a big cooking kitchen, and the people would go in and prepare all of their own meals. And of course, you have Iraqis, Kurds, Syrians, all probably would have never met each other, but they're all in the same boat. So it was interesting to see the variety.
Yeah. And did they get along well with each other? I mean, were they able to help each other?
Yeah, it seemed like people were real. I know I would have thought that people would have gotten very tribal with one another, and the Kurds but it wasn't. It really was. I think these people really realized that just to stand at that little spot in Lesbos and look and see Turkey there. And we learned a lot about the really bad people who were running the whole industry of the boats. And the boats were very, very unsafe, the life rafts that they sent them over. And we saw a whole graveyard of all the, what do you call those things?
Yeah, the life preservers.
The life preservers, but they didn't have any buoyance material in them. They were just fakes, all of them. So if you fell over, you just drowned. They just gave them a false sense. They took all their money. And so these were the people that made it, that somehow survived. I can't imagine myself surviving even just a 2.5-hour trip on a little boat like that, way overstuffed with people and little children and pregnant women. So I think when you have that experience and you get to the other side, some of that stuff like, this is who we are, I'm a this kind of an Arab and I'm a that kind, I think it's just not quite as important as just surviving and moving on with your life.
Yeah, exactly. You mentioned that it was like an interfaith group that went. Like, what were some of the people that you met who were along with the trip with you?
It was just unbelievable to travel Jews and Muslims together. And my one regret about the trip, and I'm sure there's a reason that I don't know about, is it would have been wonderful if the Muslims who had come with us were from the Bay Area. There was one of the three was from the Bay Area, Abbas and Sohail and Faharnaz, and Faharnaz lives in Anaheim, and Sohail lives in New York, and Abbas lives in the East Bay, and they were there. They observed Holocaust Remembrance Day with us, and they went to the museum and read about the humiliation of the 9,000 Jews and the deportation of the 50,000. We all went together and had these experiences and saw people just the way IsraAID, as I said, is Arabs and Jews, Muslims and Jews together, dealing with this, because we know that our experiences are so much more common than separate. And in fact, at one moment, and only a few of the Jewish people here will really appreciate this, but we took turns each giving a teaching every morning, and one of the Muslims got up one morning and he said, well, in the Quran, it says, if you can save one life, it's as if you've saved the entire world. And the Jews would be laughing, because for the Jewish people, that's in the Talmud, and it's one of our dearest expressions. They're like, what do you mean that's, and this was beautiful that we have so many of these shared traditions.
Yeah, that's so important, so important. We have a tradition here at Grace Cathedral. There's a little notepad, a little note card that you have there. So if you have questions for Beth, write down your question, and then Rebecca will gather up the questions and
while people are doing that, I have to say, because it's so nice to be here with people from the church and people from our synagogue. We have a superstar here. She just waved for a second. Shulamit runs her own organization that sends teddy bears to refugee children and to people in need. And they just ran a huge, beautiful spread on her in yesterday's San Francisco Chronicle that everyone should look at. And she just sent this huge shipment of teddy bears to refugee children in Jordan.
Yeah.
So I'm so happy to see you and all these different ways that we do this work together.
Oh, exactly. And that's it's so important, bringing everybody together. I love the way you're talking about the doing a daily teaching.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder just what are some of the resources for your faith that have kind of given you hope and inspired you in this work, and that have been inspiring for other people too?
Well, for me, the funny thing is that it's the Jewish story itself, that there have just been, Judaism is such an ancient religion, thousands of years before Christ. And the fact that Judaism just has looked so many times like it just didn't even have a hope for the next day, and that Judaism the Jewish people just kept coming through the worst of the worst. And I know that in modern times, and this is why the Sunday school is so important, a lot of people only know about the Holocaust, and that's it. But there were terrible, terrible periods for the Jewish people, and anti-Semitism is really documented when Pharaoh in the book of Exodus says, there's this different people, and let's, get rid of all the firstborn baby boys. And that's how, Moses comes into being. An act of defiance on the part of all these women saves Moses' life. And when congregants come to me and sit down one-on-one, as they do with you for pastoral care, and they describe a situation that sounds so hopeless and dismal, I think to look to the Jewish story as a story of hope and survival. And when we're living in a time now when I almost think, is it ever going to get better for the Syrian people? This is just looks hopeless. Is it going to get better for the Palestinians and the Israelis? Is it always going to be like this? I really believe that things will eventually get better, and that we do have to be doing all that we can do about that. But the hope really for me is that if you really study Jewish history carefully, there's really no reason that Judaism should exist, or that I should be sitting here, or that we should be here right now. But here we are, and it should give us all hope.
Yeah, you're right, exactly. Think of all those huge empires, and there's nothing left of them. They're just like some writings on stone tablets, and there's no person who says, I'm an Akkadian. And
to me, for the Jewish people, probably the most important thing that some Jews don't always like to acknowledge is that the capacity to evolve and change with the times while holding on to the core principles of Judaism, but to realize that we understand new and different things in our time, and to let the religion really acknowledge that and embrace it has, I think, been part of the key.
Yeah, I think that's a part of the religious impulse. There's like a sense of the mystery of God, the mystery of divinity that we can't ever figure out. We get little glimpses of things here and there, but we can't see the whole picture. Sometimes that can be kind of inspiring to know that we're not the ones who are in charge of everything all the time.
As we are reminded on a daily, if not hourly basis.
Sometimes. So speaking about not being in charge of things or being in charge of things, I think since the election, things have changed in terms of just kind of our national consciousness.
Yeah.
And
our service attendance is way up.
Yeah.
How about yours?
Yeah,
People are praying.
People were praying.
People are praying.
People were praying, definitely. People came here exactly for that reason. And I do think there's a way in which people have gathered together in ways that just, I try to think of what the biggest event would have been for us this year if it hadn't been for the Women's March. But Women's March activated huge numbers of people for us. And,
That's hopeful.
Yeah, it is hopeful. It is hopeful. But I wonder what you see in terms of just like how can we be, kind of change attitudes about immigrants and refugees. What chances and hopes do you see for that here in America?
I think it's I do think that it's very weary that the Syrian conflict not only drags on 6 years later, but when you really keep reading about it, it's not a good versus evil situation. It's a bad and worse. It's a really very ugly, messy, complicated. It's so sad for the Syrian people. So it would be easy for anybody to get fatigue and just be done with that. And I know, last week in the New York Times Magazine, they had a whole a long essay about Aleppo. And I think it's important to keep reading these stories and imagining the people that are living through all of this. I think that's vital.
Yeah, I have a friend who's a Syrian. He's a Syrian Anglican priest. He was here visiting this last year, and just sent me a message. He just said, there's a lot of geopolitical interests too. So I mean, there are these big powers that have interests in Syria that
I know it's all it's the geopolitics of it, and these people, these other regimes that are kind of have a political interest that doesn't have to do with humanity. It's very, very difficult, and yet we have to keep thinking of the best things to do and at least being aware of it. And I do think that there are numerous organizations like Shulamit's, like IsraAID, where we actually have an opportunity, if we want to really contribute. And maybe, IsraAID will run more trips, and if they ever did and you could go see it for yourself, I think it's very worthwhile to actually meet the people who are this is happening to right now. And I know that in the East Bay, they really are valiantly struggling to settle refugees when they're allowed into this country. And I think we can politically continue. The vetting process is so extreme in this country that when someone actually makes it in, they really, really are a refugee. And we could be asking for more. I know that there's an interfaith refugee group, and Grace Cathedral and Emanu-El are both part of it. And I know on June 21st, they're having an event, and someone's going to be speaking about what the vetting process is in the United States, and I'm going to go to that. I think that's really important. And I'm going to talk to the interfaith group, because I think that we could sponsor one together. We could all sponsor one of these important, like an Arab Israeli doctor, going to one of the encampments to work with refugees. That's something that we can do. Yeah, definitely. So here's some questions that people wrote down. I'm curious, what is the common language, if there is one, among the refugees? How did they communicate? Yeah, I think that most speak Arabic. I think that's the most common language there. And then many speak a surprising amount of English, a little bit of English, just enough, a little bit of English to get by. But I think primarily Arabic. Yeah. Here's another question. A report said that for the same amount of money to bring one refugee to the USA could help save 12 refugees locally in a safe zone area. So do we really help 12 refugees live in this local safe zone, or just help one refugee by bringing the refugee to the USA? Well, I'm just going to say that I think that we live in a time of such wealth and prosperity that we can do both. I really think that we can do both. That it is true that the money goes a lot. There are all these people that are in situ wherever they are, and they need our help, and that's the IsraAID model. And then I think that so many of us are who we are because our families fled from Poland or Germany or wherever they had to flee from, Romania, and somehow they got into the United States, and that has worked out really well for us and our families, and I don't see why we would be denying that to other families and using the excuse that we're afraid that all these terrorists are going to come in, because I think we have ways to keep that from happening, but I think that we can make them both happen. Yeah. I mean, this year each year the cathedral has a theme, and when we choose the theme, we don't realize exactly how it's going to play out. But our theme this year is the gift, and so just thinking about those things that we receive that aren't part of like an economic exchange, where I'll give you $10 and you give me 2 bunches of oranges or whatever. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the gifts that refugees bring to our
our communities to the United States?
Yeah, well, some of them are really obvious to all of us. Some of the refugees who came here earlier are our own grandparents and great-grandparents, and the gift they gave was us having a life in America, and that was a really great gift. So refugees who come right now from Syria or Afghanistan or Kurdistan or wherever, the Yazidis, their future generations are going to make great contributions to life in the United States. They may become the future pastors or imams or doctors or all the things, environmentalists. God willing, we'll still have an environment. So that's I think that's a gift, and we just know that it's more interesting when it's not just all of the same people, and that's what made the trip so interesting was Jews and Muslims together, and it's what makes IsraAID so interesting: Israeli Arabs and Israeli Jews together, and meeting these very beautiful human beings. Boy, if some of them, the one that we went to on Holocaust Remembrance Day, where it was the apartment building that the British couple bought, and it was about 70 people, and Aveen and her family and the others, they served us a feast that night. That was a gift that they wanted to give us. They used their money. They spent the whole day preparing a tremendous abundance of food. And let me tell you, we could use a few Kurdish restaurants here in the Bay Area because the food is absolutely delicious. It's flavorful and wonderful, and it was a gift. So there's so many ways.
Yeah, so culturally and in every respect. Okay, how as people of faith, and the two of you as religious leaders, do we break out of our bubble to reach out, to connect, to help solve this refugee issue from here? And then there's a little comment, a parenthetical comment that says, current government, and then the not equal sign, helpful.
Right, but it's the government that we have right now, for at least 4 years, and it makes the role of people all the more important, and it makes the role of community all the more important, and it makes the role of religions. I mean, we have these great institutions like Grace Cathedral and Congregation Emanu-El and all the other churches and synagogues and mosques that we have, and we all we were joking together because we both have this experience that we came into this job to just minister to the people, but we also ended up going to a lot of budget meetings and management and organization and what are we going to do about the scratch in the floor that needs to be repaired. So I think we need to not lose sight of the power of our religious institutions, not just to be self-sustaining, but to be out there doing this vital work. And I think we can come together, and that's why I was happy to learn about the Interfaith Refugee Awareness Program, and I want to get more involved in that, and I hope that you will join us and do that.
Yeah, I'm very excited. Just in the same way that the people in IsraAID brought together Arabs and Jews, and just as you Muslims and Jewish leaders, and I think this will bring people together too.
Yeah.
Could you talk? So here's my second to last question is: could you talk about the Yazidi?
Oh, and I have my iPad, and if anyone wants to see just a couple pictures, I'm not quite sure where they were living. We did not go to them in their encampment, but we were brought to, so I didn't quite understand what the building was that we pulled up in a bus, and we went into this building, and there were some sandwiches, and we sat down, and some Yazidis came and spoke to us, 3 or 4 men and this beautiful, I want to show you all his picture, 8-year-old boy who just had the most beatific smile of any child, including my own, that I've ever seen, and they have pretty beatific smiles. And I always think about this 8-year-old boy every day, and I look at his picture a lot. A lot of us heard in the news a couple years back about how ISIS had driven this Yazidi population onto Mount Sinjar in the Sinjar province and tried to start. They really were trying to kill them all. I barely understand. I've looked at it on Wikipedia. Yazidis have some syncretistic kind of religion where they cobble together all kinds of different ideas from different faiths. Some of it Muslim, but some of it other ideas, maybe even some Christian pieces to their faith. And
Byzantine Christian.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Eastern Orthodox.
Right.
Life.
And this just really drives ISIS crazy, and they can't abide by it, and they are literally murdering and torturing every Yazidi they can get their hands on. So the community has tried, but they're trapped, but many of them have tried to flee, and a number of them, for 8 days, they had no food and no water. Mm-hmm. And again, children, pregnant women, men, and just a horrifying situation. It was amazing that the people that we sat with, they had survived this. And that 8-year-old boy, I realized he was 5, and he went those 8 days without any food or water as a 5-year-old. And somehow, I've heard variant stories that the PKK or even possibly the United States was able to blow out a path for them to escape out the back of the mountain, and then some of them were able to get across. And it's just, again, I feel as a Jewish person, the sense of identification with someone just looking at you and saying, oh, you're that religion? I want to kill you. Yeah. I don't think your people have a place anywhere on this earth, and we'd like to we'd like to have a world that was free of all of you. And that's what they're trying to do to the Yazidis. So they were there in Greece, and they're the survivors, and they're, trying to, we had a translator, we had a Arabic-speaking translator from Israel, and he was really in tears and very deeply emotional as he was just trying to sit and translate their stories. And they shared some stories that I decided I just won't share with anyone ever in my life, because they were so shocking and so brutal and inhumane that it's just an image you would never want to have in your head. But we should all know that there are, some people who will literally stop at nothing to try, if they just don't like somebody because of their religion, and you meet the individual human being. And I know I've had this as a Jew. I've had in my life. I was in France once, and this guy overheard my husband and I talking. We were 18-year-olds in the junior year abroad program, and he said, "Oh, you're Jews, and he really didn't like Jews, but he was sort of fascinated, and he wanted to talk to us. And you got to be able to talk to people. If you think you don't like a whole category of people, you probably have not met them and sat down with them and talked with them one-on-one, because it is very difficult to hate the individual human being. And it's very sad that we pick whole categories of people and decide that we, want to destroy an entire category. And we know that there are people who don't want there to be African Americans, don't want there to be Jews, don't want there to be gay people, don't want there to be Palestinians, don't want there to be an Israel, all of these things. And that's why the one-on-ones are so important.
My friend who's the Syrian priest, he told me some horrifying things. And I wonder how you arrived at that, just that kind of a philosophy, basically. It says, this story ends with me. I'm not going to pass this on. How did you decide to do that? And did you decide to do that in any other area of your life?
No, I can't think of another example of that. It's an interesting thing. We all know that there's horror, and some people have a big stomach and they can read the most horrible stories and the worst possible things that human beings can do to one another, and then other people just say, I just can't, I can't hear that. And I think that we have a very deep responsibility to hear it. And then there are just certain things that are, there are things that were done to the Jews during the Holocaust, and they're so gruesome. And some people need to actually hear those things, or for whatever reason, unless they hear that, they can't believe that it was such a big deal. But I think we don't always need to hear the most gruesome thing to realize. This is very bad,
Yeah.
and we, anything that we can do, and it really again starts with staying aware, because one of the things when we were sitting with the Yazidis, one of the IsraAID guys said to the men, most people in the United States, they don't really know anything about Yazidis, and they don't know about your story. But I thought it was really covered in the newspaper.
Yeah,
we all had access to
Right.
it. It's not like we found out months later that had happened. We got it in real time from the New York Times, but it was very, very hard to know what to do. And so that's why organizations, IsraAID and others that are actually on the ground, I feel grateful to them that we can support them in their work.
Yeah. I feel like about preaching, I mean, you can tell a story and you're harming the people as you're telling them that. And you have to be very careful about
Right.
what you say.
Right,
'Cause,
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I always remember one Friday night at my first synagogue in Scarsdale, we invited someone who is running a domestic abuse organization to speak Friday night. And in the Jewish tradition, when the sun goes down Friday, it's the Sabbath, and it's a time of joy and celebration. And even if you have had a loss, you're supposed to put that aside and not mourn on the Sabbath. But this person got up and she really shared brutal stories of her own personal experience. And I know there were synagogue members who felt very uncomfortable, like, I don't come to synagogue, to
Right.
hear these terrible stories. I just want to relax and celebrate and thank God. But, I think sometimes we have to let ourselves hear those stories.
It's a hard, I mean, the story of Jesus is a story of terrible suffering. And,
Right.
Yeah. I have another question. The Lesbos accommodations sound promising and hopeful. Can you talk about other refugee camps located elsewhere?
It's funny because I saw what I saw, and since I've come back, I've read a little bit about refugee camps in Jordan, and they sound terrible. They sound like they're way too big, and they're not staffed in a caring kind of way. They're just warehouses for people. And again, the people that are there, maybe that's better than being dead, but it's not a lot better than being dead if you're just treated in a very inhumane way, and it's so big, and you're just told, here's the food, eat the food, go to bed, you can't have your light on, you can't have this or that. So if I had the chance to go visit one of those camps, I would go so I could see it with my own eyes. But I only know what I saw with my own eyes. And as I said, that one really bad camp in Lesbos, we weren't allowed to go in there.
Yeah. You mentioned that just like we do know a lot about the Yazidis. You're totally right, and we all know that story from reading it in the newspapers. I wonder how social media has changed just our experience of all this. I just think of, like you said, those poor young men, the 9,000 being humiliated in that Greek town.
Right, and no one could tweet about that.
No one could tweet about that.
Right,
no
in the 1940s. But I think it's a mix. I think on the one hand, it's great because word gets out, as the things unfolded yesterday with the horrific attack in London again. And it's hard because you start getting the news before there's even really news. Something's happened. And
right, that's what my daughter,
right?
I get my news and my daughter says something
terrible. And there was this
happened.
van, and there was maybe knives, and then it sort of unfolds very quickly. And I even yesterday decided, I'm going to wait an hour and just wait until the story is out to hear what happened there. But on the other hand, I think we're so bombarded with social media that I think sometimes it's just like another tragedy that we're reading about, and it can be very difficult not to tune it out or numb ourselves to it. And we have, as human beings and humans of faith, I think it's part of our work every day to get up and say, okay, I know there's bad in the world, and I know that my life is a life just filled with blessing and privilege, and anything I can do today to use that blessing and privilege to help others or to raise awareness. And I think we all, all of our religions call on us to give charity, to give tzedakah, And sometimes we do that in a sort of perfunctory sort of way. I gotta give these guys, $18 or $100 and get them off my back. But to really think about our donation dollars and how we can use them wisely and effectively, whether it's locally for the issues here in the Bay Area or internationally for the refugees. I think these are things that we have the power to do.
Right. I mean, there's so many different Episcopal relief organizations and Jewish relief organizations. And even just, in researching for today, I was looking at the United Nations Commission on High Refugees, their website, and how there are a lot of ways for us to figure out how to help. What do you think what do you see as the future in these, for refugees? I mean, you spent so much time with these experts. What did you learn from them in terms of just like what we might have to look forward to for the future, or how things are going? I mean, there are a larger number of displaced persons in the world last year than at any other time since World War II. And is this going to continue at this rate? What does it look like for us in the future?
Yeah, I know. I missed that whole class in rabbinical school where you get to go and learn exactly what's going to happen.
They open up the special book that has
I know. I kept walking around looking for the class, and I never could. Could find it. I honestly, we live in such uncertain times that I just really try to concentrate on today and what's going on now. I know there are people that are really trying to work and make things better for the future. I think that a limitation of IsraAID is it is providing educational opportunities for children. So I think that's really important. I really like that one of the hardest things about that whole beautiful visit in the urban apartment complex where Avin's family and all the families served us this beautiful dinner, and we really connected. And then when I gave her a hug goodbye, she said, "Am I going to see you again?" And I just knew inside, probably not ever. I'm just going to try to carry your story everywhere I go. And I feel so limited in what we're able to do, but there's still more than nothing, or even just a tiny little bit.
I guess in my research too, other environmental refugees. We haven't talked about refugees from Africa, but there are a huge number of refugees coming out of Africa right now.
Yeah, and for me, I just think, when I was thinking about the Iraqis and the Syrians, I think what they really want, as I would understand, is not to come to Wisconsin or someplace like that. They want to be in Syria, and they want to be in Iraq, and they want to be where in their own countries with their own beautiful cultures, observing those cultures and not having their lives threatened. So to me, I wish the best of the world powers could come together and figure out how to set those countries back on the path of just being places where people can live safely and comfortably, and that would be, to me, that would be an ideal. Do you know about the future?
Well, like I said, I do. I can tell you, things are going to get a lot warmer. And the sea levels are going to get a lot higher. And the drought conditions are going to get more severe, and the severe
and then all of that
conditions
drives the refugee problem.
Completely. I just think of like Rwanda. Would the genocide in Rwanda have happened if there hadn't been such severe environmental pressures?
Right. Or even Thomas Friedman argues that Syria, that if you wind it all the way back, it was a massive drought and a lack of resources, and that started the Civil War.
Yeah. So when I asked you the question, I had no idea. But as we talked, that's what I mean. But you've spent so many times thinking about this issue, talking to experts.
I'm always thinking about it.
God gets you somewhere.
It is hard sometimes to see the great hopeful future. Except to look, somehow the whole world did get through World War II, and here we are today. And it always amazes me that so many Jews talk about visiting Berlin and how much they love going to Berlin. My husband just led a congregational tour, and he was in Berlin and just said it was so great. And we hear about all the people who love going to visit Vietnam and Cambodia as tourists. I want to visit Syria. I want to see, I imagine it's a spectacularly beautiful country.
Exactly.
I want to imagine that at some point things, one way or another, things really calm down there and life resumes, and people realize that it's more productive and it's more economically viable to find a way to create peace
Yeah, that gives me so much hope to think that one day these places may be places that we all visit.
Right, because in 1970, could you imagine someone saying, "Oh, I think I might want to go
Yeah,
visit Vietnam"?
Right, exactly.
You know?
No, you're totally right. So here's a question that I just got. How can we lobby our politicians, Feinstein, Pelosi, et cetera, to support Barbara Leas to stop funding boots on the ground in Syria? Sorry, there's a lot of cross-outs, see? Here,
See if we can figure it out. There are politicians to support a bill to stop funding.
Bill, you're right.
Yeah. You know, I am just stumped about, a lot of people I know really feel that the Obama administration could have done a lot more for Syria in his time. And I just don't know. You know, I just don't know. I think if you think that there's a bill out there that is going to be helpful to the Syrian people, when I read this essay in last week's New York Times Magazine about Aleppo and how ultimately Bashar al-Assad's forces really retook it from the rebels, and the rebels themselves were not good people, and Assad's certainly not good, but that a lot of Syrians right now at this moment in Aleppo are, you know, choosing one evil over another. Yeah. I know that I, as a rabbi, I'm not a political science major, I'm not a government person, but I'm always looking for good opportunities to, if someone can convince me that there's something we all should be convincing our government to do, a bill, or just I'm really excited to go on June 21st and hear about the vetting process so that we can confidently argue that the United States really could save some more lives and bring some more refugees in a way that's not going to damage the United States.
Yeah. Well, I'm so grateful to have you here, Beth. I mean, it's such a
such
blessing
an
to
honor.
be together.
Thank
Yeah.
you. Thank you.
We appreciate your passion, your sense of justice, just the heart that you bring to everything that you do, and I'm so grateful that you're.
Thank you, and I appreciate all the Emanu-El people that are here.
Yeah, exactly.
That enable. That is really the synagogue and your church that's the people that enable us these opportunities. And I never would have had this chance to go to Greece if it wasn't for my congregation.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
I'm grateful for that too.
So next week for the forum, we're having Joel Selvin. It's our last Summer of Love forum. He wrote a book called The Summer of Love about rock music, mostly in the 1967 and 70. Fascinating book. I just finished reading it, and we're looking forward to having him next week. And then that'll be the end of our spring forums. We depend on you for gifts, so there's a little gift box that you can make a donation to the forum there. And you're also welcome to join us at the 11 o'clock service. Mark Andrus, the Bishop of California, will be preaching today.
Wow.
So a lot of good things going on. I'm so glad to see you, and
thank you.
Look forward to our next time together.
Thank you very
Thanks
much.
so much for coming, Beth.
Thanks a lot.